Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. Today we are going to continue the chapter number 28 of your Guyton, which is concerned with the reabsorption and secretion of substances along the renal tubules. Yesterday we discussed the general concept of reabsorption of substances along the nephron. We discussed the primary and secondary active transports, and we discussed the transport maximum and so on. Today we are going to discuss reabsorption and secretion of different substances along different parts of nephrons. So this is very important. You may be asked a question about the reabsorption of sodium along different parts of the nephron, or you may be asked about the reabsorption of water along parts of nephron. So these are two important questions which are asked from the topic we are going to cover today. So keep your mind open while we are discussing this topic, and keep it in your mind that you might be asked this question in your exam. So let us begin with the proximal convoluted tubule. Now what is the proximal convoluted tubule? So the Bowman's capsule, which is the first part of the nephron, extends into a tubule which is known as the proximal convoluted tubule, which then extends into the loop of Henle. So we are now going to discuss only this portion of the nephron, which is known as the proximal convoluted tubule. So the substances which are reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule include sodium, potassium, glucose, amino acids, uric acid, vitamin C, and lactic acid. These are substances which are being reabsorbed. Okay, remember that around 65% of all of the substances which were filtered in the Bowman's capsule are now being reabsorbed, and among these, sodium, glucose and amino acid are of great importance, and they are often discussed. Remember that the percentage of sodium which is reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule is around 65%. So the percentage of your filtered sodium, out of all of your filtered sodium, 65% is reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule, and it is followed by water. So 65% water is also reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule. And remember, 100% of glucose and 100% of amino acids are reabsorbed in the proximal part of your proximal convoluted tubule. And please remember that sodium here is reabsorbed by various mechanisms. It is reabsorbed by simple facilitated diffusion. It is also transported by primary active transport in the form of sodium potassium ATPase pump. It is also reabsorbed in the form of secondary active transport along with glucose and amino acids, or in a secondary active antiport with sodium and hydrogen exchanger and sodium and potassium exchanger. So the forms in which sodium is reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule are also important. So 65% of sodium is reabsorbed, and 100% of glucose and amino acid is reabsorbed. And there is passive reabsorption of chloride, water, carbon dioxide, urea, and some proteins which are filtered in the Bowman's capsule. And you must remember that chloride is transported along its electrical and chemical gradient, as we discussed before. But water follows sodium and other solutes, so it is also transported with passive transportation. And carbon dioxide is a gas. Proteins to transfer, it directly passes through the lipid membrane, as it is lipid soluble. So the active transportation is of sodium, potassium, glucose, amino acids, and the passive transport dioxide. There are also some substances which are secreted from the tubular capillaries into the lumen, and these are waste products which need to be removed from the circulation completely. So some hydrogen ions and other organic acids and bases which are present in the peritubular capillaries are secreted into the lumen, so they can be excreted in the urine. Here is a figure which is showing the proximal convoluted tubule, and here is a percentage showing 65% of reabsorption of sodium, and sodium is actively reabsorbed, and there is primary active and secondary active transport. In secondary active transport there is co-transport along with glucose and amino acids, and there is anti-transport with hydrogen ions and potassium ions. So this figure is showing that from the lumen, sodium, chloride, bicarbs, potassium, water, glucose and amino acids are being reabsorbed, and hydrogen ions and organic acids or bases are being secreted from the peritubular capillaries. Here you can see the peritubular capillaries, and they are secreting waste products into the lumen to be excreted, and they are reabsorbing all of these substances from the lumen into the peritubular capillaries. So I hope you got this concept. So as for sodium and water, remember 65% of sodium and water is reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule. Now let's move on to the loop of Henle. Let us first discuss the thin portion of the descending limb of the loop of Henle. Here no solute is reabsorbed. Please remember this. It is only permeable to water, and a lot of water is reabsorbed from the descending limb of loop of Henle into the peritubular capillaries, and this portion is is impermeable to solutes, and no solutes like sodium, hydrogen ions or potassium ions or chloride or glucose can pass from the tubule towards the peritubular capillaries. It is only permeable to water. So the only movement that is going to take place through the descending limb is that of water. Then we have the ascending portion of the thin limb. Here you can see the ascending portion of the thin limb. The only substance which is transported here is urea, and urea is also being secreted from the peritubular capillaries into the thin loop so that it can be excreted in the form of urine. And as I mentioned in the previous lecture, this thin portion is absolutely impermeable to water. No water can pass from the ascending thin limb into the peritubular capillaries. So the descending thin limb was very permeable to water. The ascending thin limb is absolutely impermeable to water, and only some urea is being secreted from the peritubular capillaries into the thin ascending limb. Next we have the thick ascending limb. This is a very important part of the nephron. So here we have the thick ascending limb, and this limb is also impermeable to water. Remember that your ascending limb as a whole is impermeable to water in all conditions. So no water can pass from the ascending limb into the peritubular capillaries. So another important feature of the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle is there is present a special type of transporter which is responsible for the reabsorption of sodium, potassium and 2 chloride ions, and this transporter is known as sodium potassium 2 chloride co-transporter. So what this does is it carries a sodium ion and a positive ion, and to balance the reabsorption of 2 positive ions it carries 2 negative chloride ions so that the electrical charge within the lumen can be maintained. And this co-transporter is responsible for around 25% of reabsorption of Sodium. You must remember that 65% of sodium was reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule through facilitated diffusion and primary and secondary active transport, and here in the thick ascending limb 25% of sodium is being reabsorbed by secondary active transport, and the transporter is sodium potassium 2 chloride co-transporter. And as I mentioned before, that this part of the nephron is absolutely impermeable to water, and no water is reabsorbed from this part of the nephron. Here you can see the figure showing the transport of water from the thin descending limb into the peritubular capillaries. As I mentioned before, that this portion is only permeable to water and it is absolutely impermeable to solutes. So water is being reabsorbed from this portion of the nephron into the peritubular capillaries. Next we have the thick ascending limb, and this thick ascending limb is also impermeable to water like the thin ascending limb. So this portion of the nephron is impermeable to water no matter what, but it is highly permeable to solutes, and there is present a special transporter known as sodium potassium 2 chloride, which is responsible for 25% of sodium reabsorption, and along with sodium, chloride and potassium ions are also reabsorbed. Calcium, bicarb and magnesium ions are also reabsorbed from this part of the nephron, and hydrogen ions are secreted from the peritubular capillaries into the nephron to be excreted in the urine. Then very important information regarding the sodium potassium 2 chloride transporter is that it is the site of action for loop diuretics. Now what is meant by loop diuretics? These are special type of drugs which cause diuresis. Diuresis means large quantities of urine, and these are given to patients who are suffering from hypertension or suffering from fluid overload within the circulatory system. And when you need to remove fluid from the body in form of urine, either to reduce swelling from the body or to reduce blood pressure, these drugs are given to a person, and these are known as loop diuretics. Now what do loop diuretics do is they act on the sodium potassium 2 chloride transporter and they inhibit it. Now no sodium is being transported from the lumen into the cell to the peritubular capillaries, and sodium and chloride and potassium are going to remain within the lumen, and these are going to is also going to be captured within the lumen, and it is not going to be reabsorbed. Let me repeat that sodium these loop diuretics are going to inhibit the transporter, and sodium and is not going to be transported from the lumen into the peritubular capillaries, and sodium is going to stay within the lumen, and it is also going to attract water and keep water with itself within the lumen, and this sodium, when it is not reabsorbed, it is going to be excreted in the form of urine, and it is also going to take a lot of water with it, and this is known as diuresis, removal of sodium and water from the body with the help of diuretic drugs. So this is how loop diuretics act, and example of loop diuretics are furosemide, ethacrenic acid and butadienide. So you must remember, this is important for MCQ point of view. You might be asked that the site of action of loop diuretics is, and you have to select the option thick ascending limb or the sodium potassium 2 chloride transporter. Let us now move on to the next part of the nephron, which is the distal convoluted tubule. So after the Bowman's capsule and proximal convoluted tubule and loop of Henle, we have the distal convoluted tubule. The distal convoluted tubule is divided into two parts, the early part and the late distal convoluted tubule. So the early distal convoluted tubule is also known as the diluting segment. Let us now discuss the early distal convoluted tubule. It is responsible for the reabsorption of sodium, chloride, calcium and magnesium. So as I mentioned before that around 65% of sodium is reabsorbed from the proximal convoluted tubule, and 25% of sodium is reabsorbed from the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle. Remaining sodium is reabsorbed in the distal convoluted tubules and the collecting ducts. So it is the remaining sodium which is being reabsorbed in the early distal convoluted tubule, and then there is also reabsorption of chloride, calcium and magnesium. Then the important part is that it is impermeable to water no matter what. So, and the portions we have studied so far are the proximal convoluted tubule, the descending limb of Henle, thin ascending limb, the thick ascending limb, and then we have the early distal convoluted tubule. So the proximal convoluted tubule was very permeable to water. The descending loop of Henle was only permeable to water. The thin ascending limb, the thick ascending limb and the early distal convoluted tubule are absolutely impermeable to water no matter what. So no water is going to be reabsorbed from the thin ascending limb, the thick ascending limb and the early part of the distal convoluted tubule. You must remember this. This is very important because you might be asked an SCQ to give the reabsorption of water from different parts of the nephron. Here you can see the early part of the distal convoluted tubule, and it is responsible for the reabsorption of sodium, chloride, calcium and magnesium. Also remember an interesting fact. Do you remember the macula densa cells that we studied during the tubuloglomerular feedback mechanism which detects sodium concentration? They are present in the in this part of your distal convoluted tubule, and you can see that this distal convoluted tubule earlier portion is in contact with the afferent and efferent arterioles, so it can prompt the secretion of renin through the JG cells of the afferent and efferent arterioles. So this was just an interesting information for you as a reminder that your macula densa cells, which are involved in the detection of sodium and which cause the secretion of renin from the JG cells, are present in the early part of your distal convoluted tubule. Let us now discuss some diuretics which act specifically on the early part of the distal convoluted tubule, and this is a very important diuretic which is known as thiazide diuretic. Now what thiazide diuretic does is it inhibits this sodium chloride co-transporter which is present in the early distal convoluted tubule, and this is going to cause sodium to be stranded within the lumen, and sodium will not be reabsorbed and it will remain in the lumen. This sodium is going to attract water as well, and water is also going to stay within the lumen, and this sodium along with water is going to be excreted from the body in the form of urine or diluted greater than larger quantities of urine is known as diuresis. So this is how thiazide diuretics help in reducing the blood volume by inhibiting the sodium reabsorption in the early portion of the distal convoluted tubule. Now let us move on to the late distal convoluted tubule. This is a very important part of the nephron. It contains two types of cells, the principal cells and intercalated cells. So the distal convoluted tubule, as I mentioned before, was divided into two parts, the early part and the distal part. Now we are going to discuss the distal part. This distal part has two types of cells. One type of cell is known as principal cells and the another type of cells is known as intercalated cells. The principal cells are responsible for reabsorption of sodium, and secretion of potassium. This is very, very important. Principal cells cause reabsorption of sodium from the lumen towards the peritubular capillaries, and they cause secretion of potassium from the peritubular capillaries into the lumen of the nephron, and potassium is excreted in the urine. So to remember this, you can remember the mnemonic P for principal cells, and P for potassium, and P for secreted in P as children call urine. ठीक है, तो principal cells secrete potassium into the pee or urine. You must remember this. This is very, very important. You might be asked about the function of principal cells in sodium potassium reabsorption and secretion. So you must know that principal cells are responsible for sodium reabsorption and secretion of potassium. Then on the other hand, we have intercalated cells which have opposite function to that of the principal cells. These intercalated cells are responsible for reabsorption of potassium and bicarbonate, and they are responsible for secretion of hydrogen ions into the lumen from the peritubular capillaries, and this portion is impermeable to water unless and until there is present ADH. So this is very important. You must remember that this is your nephron, and this is your proximal convoluted tubule, your descending thin limb, your ascending thin limb, your ascending thick limb, then your early distal convoluted tubule. Your proximal convoluted tubule and descending limb were permeable to water. Your ascending thin limb, ascending thick limb, and early distal convoluted tubule were impermeable to water no matter what. But your late distal convoluted tubule along with collecting ducts are impermeable to water but may become highly permeable to water in the presence of ADH. So you must remember this. Even the distal convoluted tubule is divided into two parts. The earlier parts is impermeable to water no matter what. Either there is present ADH or no ADH is present, water is not going to be reabsorbed from the early distal convoluted tubule, from the thick ascending limb and the thin ascending limb. But your late distal convoluted tubules and your collecting ducts are impermeable to water in the absence of ADH, but when there is ADH present within your blood, there is going to be great amount of water which is reabsorbed from your distal convoluted tubules, your collecting tubules and collecting ducts. So as a revision, let me tell you, your late distal convoluted tubule has two types of cells: the principal cells and intercalated cells. Principal cells reabsorb sodium and they secrete potassium into the lumen. Your intercalated cells reabsorb potassium and excrete hydrogen ions. So this is very important. You must remember this. And your late distal convoluted tubule is impermeable to water in the absence of ADH and highly permeable to water in the presence of ADH. Here you can see your late distal convoluted tubule. Here you can see your principal cells. They are reabsorbing sodium and they are excreting potassium. And here you can see your intercalated cells. They are reabsorbing potassium and bicarb ions and they are secreting hydrogen ions. And when there is present ADH, there is going to be reabsorption of water. Another important information is that your late distal convoluted tubule is the site of action for aldosterone. This is a hormone which is secreted by your adrenal glands, and it acts on your late distal convoluted tubule and increases the reabsorption of sodium from this part of the nephron. So there are two types of diuretics which act on the late distal convoluted tubule. One are the sodium channel blockers, which directly block the sodium channels present on the late distal convoluted tubule and do not allow sodium to be reabsorbed. Secondly, there are aldosterone antagonists which act as antagonists to aldosterone and do not allow aldosterone to exert its function on the late distal convoluted tubule, so no sodium can be reabsorbed from this portion. You must remember the names of the sodium channel blockers. These are amiloride and triamcinolone, and the aldosterone antagonists include spironolactone, which is a very common diuretic which is used very commonly in hospital settings. Then substances which are transported in the collecting duct include water, and it is reabsorbed only in the presence of ADH, otherwise this portion is impermeable to water. Urea is reabsorbed from this portion because of its concentration gradient. Urea is very concentrated in the last parts of the nephron, and along its concentration gradient it is reabsorbed from here into the peritubular capillaries. And as always, hydrogen ions are secreted from the peritubular capillaries into the last part of the nephron, so they can be removed from the body to maintain the acid base balance within the body. Another important substance which is not normally present in the body, it is a synthetic substance which is injected from outside, is known as inulin, and you must remember how inulin is treated within the nephron. So inulin is a substance which is a polysaccharide and it is used to measure glomerular filtration rate. So the important thing about inulin is that it is neither reabsorbed nor secreted from the renal tubules. So once when it is injected into a person, it distributes in the blood of the person and is filtered in the kidneys from the glomerulus, and once it enters the Bowman's capsule and into the nephron, it is neither reabsorbed nor it is secreted. So it is its excretion in the urine is going to be equal to its filtration. ठीक है, तो इनुलिन एक सिंथेटिक सब्सटेंस है जो कि हम बॉडी के अंदर इंजेक्ट करते हैं. दिस सब्सटेंस इज फ्रीली फिल्टर्ड 100% फ्रॉम द ब्लड इनटू द नेफ्रॉन and it is not reabsorbed and it is not secreted from the peritubular capillaries into the nephron. So the amount of inulin which appears in the urine is going to be equal to the amount of filtered inulin. So you can calculate the glomerular filtration rate with the help of inulin. So it is a very important MCQ nugget. Sorry for this. It is an important MCQ that which of the following substance is used for the measurement of GFR. If you are given an option of inulin, inulin is going to be the right answer. So changes in inulin concentration at different parts along the renal tubule reflects changes in the amount of water present in the tubular fluid. Not only can you calculate the glomerular filtration rate, but also you can calculate the amount of water which is present in a certain part of a nephron. The reason for this is that once inulin enters the nephron, its concentration is going to remain same because it is not going to be reabsorbed or secreted. So if you give 3 grams of inulin and it is 3 grams of inulin is filtered in the nephron, it is going to remain 3 grams throughout the nephron because neither of it is going to be reabsorbed nor is it going to be secreted from the peritubular capillaries. But when a lot of water is going to be reabsorbed from some portion of the nephron, of course the concentration of inulin in that part is going to increase relative to water, and this can give you information about the movement of water in that part of the nephron. So if you do not remember this, it is not a problem, but you must remember that inulin is freely filtered in the nephron. It is neither secreted nor reabsorbed, and the amount which is filtered is exactly equal to the amount which is excreted in the urine. So inulin can be used to measure filtration of glomerulus. Then we have regulation of tubular reabsorption. This is also an important concept. If you remember, when we were studying about the regulation of GFR, and we studied the tubuloglomerular feedback, the one with macula densa cells and renin and angiotensin, and we also studied the myogenic regulation, autoregulation of GFR. We also discussed, we also mentioned the name of glomerulotubular balance, and I told you that we will be discussing it later on in the unit. So now is the time to discuss the glomerulotubular balance. Please do not confuse glomerulotubular balance with tubuloglomerular feedback. Tubuloglomerular feedback is the feedback given to the glomerulus by the nephron through macula densa cells when it detects sodium concentration in the distal convoluted tubule and sends signals to the JG cells to secrete renin and angiotensin. So you must not confuse glomerulotubular balance with tubuloglomerular feedback, because tubuloglomerular feedback is an entirely different process which is concerned with the macula densa cells. So let us now first discuss the glomerulotubular balance. Now what is meant by glomerulotubular balance? The reabsorption rate increases in response to increased tubular load. Whenever there is increased filtration of fluid from the glomerulus into the Bowman's capsule, the rate of reabsorption from the nephron into the peritubular capillaries is also going to increase. This is known as glomerulotubular balance. So whenever filtration increases, there is going to be increased reabsorption of substances. Now how this takes place, we are going to study this in detail. First of all, what is the use of glomerulotubular balance? So it prevents the overloading of the distal tubular segments when GFR increases. So when there is a lot of filtration taking place within the glomerulus, the reabsorption is also going to increase. So most of these substances can be reabsorbed, and the load of these solutes shall not increase on the later portions of the nephron. So this is known as glomerulotubular balance. The first determinant of the glomerulotubular balance are the Starling forces. Like the Starling forces which we studied in the glomerulus, now we are going to study the Starling forces in the peritubular capillaries. But remember, in the glomerulus the forces were prompting or causing filtration. Here the forces are going to cause reabsorption. So again we are going to discuss the hydrostatic pressures and the colloid osmotic pressures. So in peritubular capillaries, the hydrostatic pressure is around 13 millimeter mercury, and of course it is going to be an outward force, and as always the osmotic pressure exerted by the plasma proteins present in the peritubular capillaries will be 32 millimeter mercury, and it is going to be an inward force. Then the hydrostatic pressure of fluid present outside in the interstitial space is around 6 millimeter mercury, and it is an inward force, and it is going to cause reabsorption. And there are present solutes and proteins in large quantities within your interstitium, and the osmotic force which they exert is around 15 millimeter mercury, and this is an outward force. So now adding all the inward and outward forces to calculate the net filtration or reabsorption pressure, you can see that there are two inward forces, which is the capillary colloid osmotic pressure and the hydrostatic pressure of the interstitium, and they amount to around 38 millimeter mercury. So inward forces are 38 millimeter mercury, while the outward forces are around 28 millimeter mercury. By adding 13 with 15, so now the difference between the outward and inward forces is the outward forces are total 28 millimeter mercury and the inward forces are greater and around 38 millimeter mercury. So the difference is around 10 millimeter mercury, and this is going to be an inward force. So there is going to take place reabsorption at the peritubular capillaries with a force of around 10 millimeter mercury. I hope you understood this. I am not putting much emphasis on this because we have already discussed Starling forces in detail when we discussed the glomerular filtration. So here we have all of those Starling forces. We have two hydrostatic pressures and two plasma colloid osmotic pressures, and remember that the colloid osmotic pressure in the interstitium is not zero like it was in the peritubular capillaries. In fact, it is very high. It is around 15 millimeter mercury because of the solutes which are present in this area, which were reabsorbed from the lumen, and also because of the proteins which are secreted by the renal epithelial cells. So here let me again repeat that suppose this is your peritubular capillary, the hydrostatic pressure in your peritubular capillaries is around 13 millimeter mercury and it's an outward force. The osmotic pressure of the plasma proteins is 32 millimeter mercury and it is an inward force. Another inward force is the hydrostatic pressure of the interstitium, and it is around 6 millimeter mercury. And then we have the osmotic pressure of the interstitium because of solutes and proteins, and it is around 15 millimeter mercury, and it is also an outward force. So the sum of all the outward and inward forces is going to be around 10 millimeter mercury in the direction of the peritubular capillaries, and the reabsorption is going to take place with a force of 10 millimeter mercury. This is the reason that there is reabsorption taking place within the peritubular capillaries, and the water moves from the lumen towards the peritubular capillaries, and it takes along solutes which are present in the interstitial space by bulk movement or ultrafiltration. So this is very important, and this is known as glomerular balance. So whenever there is going to be increased filtration in the glomerulus, a lot of fluid is going to be filtered from the glomerular capillaries into the Bowman's capsule, and the proteins which are going to be left behind in the efferent arteriole are going to be very high in concentration, and you know these efferent arterioles form the peritubular capillaries, and the blood which is going to reach in the peritubular capillaries is going to have very high concentration of plasma proteins because greater than normal fluid was filtered from the glomerulus, and by the time this blood reaches in the peritubular capillaries, it is going to have higher than normal concentration of plasma proteins, and it is going to cause greater than normal reabsorption of fluid from the nephron back into the peritubular capillary. So in this way, whenever filtration increases, reabsorption also increases. Let me repeat. According to the glomerulotubular balance, whenever filtration increases, reabsorption should also increase. So now how does this occur? I have told you about the normal Starling forces, but whenever there is greater than normal filtration at the glomerulus, a lot of fluid is going to be filtered from the glomerulus into the Bowman's capsule, and the proteins, plasma proteins, which are going to be left behind are going to become concentrated greater concentrations than normal. ठीक है, जब भी फिल्ट्रेशन नॉर्मल से ज़्यादा होती है ग्लोमेरुलस पे तो काफ़ी फ्लूइड बाहर निकल जाता है into the Bowman's capsule, and proteins cannot leave the glomerular capillaries, and the proteins which are left behind are in greater concentration than normal. And as you know that the efferent arterioles form the peritubular capillaries, so when this blood reaches the peritubular capillaries, it is going to be very rich in plasma proteins and very poor in fluid, because fluid was filtered because of increased glomerular filtration rate. And now what is going to happen is that there is going to be greater than normal reabsorption of fluid along the concentration gradient, because these proteins are going to pull a lot of water towards the peritubular capillaries. So when filtration increases, reabsorption also increases, and this is known as glomerulotubular balance. And you must not confuse it with tubuloglomerular feedback, which is the whole mechanism involving macula densa cells and renin and angiotensins. This is glomerulotubular balance. So according to this theory, that when the filtration increases, your reabsorption is also going to increase. So it is a difficult concept. Please do rewind the video and listen to it once again if you need to understand. Now coming to the effect of high blood pressure on urine output. Whenever blood pressure increases, there is increased excretion of sodium and water in urine, and this is known as pressure natriuresis and pressure diuresis. So before I explain this mechanism, please you need to remember that whenever your blood pressure is low, it is detected by your macula densa cells, and it sends signals to your JG cells to produce renin, and which produces angiotensin 2, and angiotensin 2 acts on your proximal convoluted tubule and causes reabsorption of sodium. Okay, so angiotensin not only causes constrictions of vessels all over your body, but it is also directly involved in the reabsorption of sodium from your proximal convoluted tubule. It also causes the formation of aldosterone from the adrenal glands, which is another hormone which is responsible for reabsorption of salt and water. But when there is decreased angiotensin, there is going to be no reabsorption of salt from the proximal convoluted tubule, and this sodium and water are going to be excreted in the form of urine. So let us now discuss this whole mechanism. Whenever there is increased blood pressure, there is going to be decreased angiotensin 2 formation. I do not need to go into the details of this step because we have already discussed it in previous lectures. You already know when there is increased blood pressure, there is going to be increased filtration, and there is going to be higher than normal concentrations of sodium in this filtrate. And when this sodium will reach your distal convoluted tubule, your macula densa cells are going to sense their concentration, and they are going to understand that if the concentration of sodium is very high, this means that the blood pressure is high, and they are going to reduce signals to the JG cells, and there is going to be reduced formation of renin and angiotensin. So this is how in increased blood pressure there is decreased angiotensin 2. And I just told you that angiotensin 2 causes reabsorption of sodium from the proximal convoluted tubule, and when there is going to be reduced angiotensin, the reabsorption of sodium and water is also going to decrease from proximal convoluted tubule. and this sodium and water is going to be excreted in the urine, and your blood pressure will return back to normal. This is known as pressure natriuresis and pressure diuresis, as the name indicates. Secretion of sodium in urine because of high blood pressure, or excretion of diuretic urine, which is large quantities of urine because of a high blood pressure. So this is pressure natriuresis and pressure diuresis. So very quickly, let us discuss the role of aldosterone in sodium reabsorption. First, you must remember that it is secreted by zona glomerulosa cells of adrenal cortex, and its site of action is the principal cells of the distal convoluted tubule. If you remember the mnemonic, I told you that distal convoluted tubule contains cells which are responsible for sodium reabsorption and potassium excretion. And to remember this, you can remember the mnemonic that P for principal cells, they cause potassium to be excreted into your pee or your urine. So potassium cells cause secretion of potassium into the urine and reabsorption of sodium. So aldosterone, as it acts on the principal cells, it is also responsible for increased sodium reabsorption and increased potassium secretion. The stimuli for aldosterone are increased extracellular potassium. So although aldosterone is responsible for sodium reabsorption, but the stimulus for secretion of aldosterone is increased extracellular potassium. Whenever there is increased extracellular potassium, aldosterone is going to be released, and it is going to cause excretion of potassium in the urine to reduce its values back towards normal, and it is going to cause reabsorption of sodium. And another stimulus for aldosterone secretion is, of course, angiotensin 2 levels, because renin angiotensin aldosterone mechanism also stimulates the secretion of aldosterone. And whenever there are large quantities of aldosterone secreted from your in your body, this condition is known as Conn's syndrome. And whenever the aldosterone secretion is reduced in your body, this condition is known as aldosterone, or whenever there is absence of aldosterone. So to remember this, you can remember the mnemonic A for absence, A for aldosterone, and A for adescence. Whenever there is absence of aldosterone from your body, it is going to lead to Addison's disease. And whenever there are large quantities of aldosterone in your body, this syndrome is known as Conn's syndrome or Conn's disease. You will be studying these diseases in greater details during endocrinology. Then secondly, we have angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is formed by the action of ACE enzyme on angiotensin 1, which was formed by renin when it acted on angiotensinogen. So we have already discussed the formation of angiotensin 2 in previous lectures. You can visit those lectures to revise it. Angiotensin 2 is actually responsible for reabsorption of sodium and water from the proximal convoluted tubules. We are not going to discuss the details over here. You can study your details in endocrinology. Then we have antidiuretic hormone, which also causes increased water reabsorption, and it is responsible for the permeability of late distal convoluted tubule, collecting tubules, and collecting ducts. I have already mentioned before that your nephron has different permeabilities in different parts. The proximal convoluted tubule and thin descending limb of loop of Henle are very permeable to water. The thin ascending limb, the thick ascending limb, and the early distal convoluted tubule are impermeable to water no matter what. Your late distal convoluted tubule and collecting tubules and collecting ducts are permeable to water only in the presence of ADH. So what happens is, when ADH comes, it incorporates special type of proteins known as aquaporins on the surface of your cells of the distal convoluted tubules and the collecting tubules and collecting ducts, and these proteins act as channels to allow water to be reabsorbed from the luminal surface. Here you can see this is your basolateral surface, which is next to your peritubular capillaries. Whenever there is secretion of ADH in your blood, ADH is also known as arginine vasopressin, so it can also be denoted by AVP, but it is normally known as ADH. So whenever ADH is secreted in your blood, it is going to be attached to the basolateral surface of your epithelial cells, where the receptors are going to be activated. The receptors are going to activate the G proteins and cause the formation of CAMP, and this is going to activate a protein kinase, which is going to cause the phosphorylation of certain proteins known as aquaporins. As the name indicates, these are water pores. These proteins are then incorporated on the luminal side of the epithelial cells, and these pores are going to allow a lot of water from the luminal sides to enter into the cells. So we are not going to be discussing the details now, because the details will be discussed during endocrinology. Then let us move on to the clearance of some substances. This is also an important concept. What does clearance mean? Clearance means the volume of plasma that is completely cleared of a substance by the kidney per unit time. So to understand this concept, let me give you an example. Suppose this is your circulatory system, and it is passing, the blood is passing from your through your kidneys, and it is being filtered every minute. Suppose you inject a substance into your circulatory system, and it is allowed to be equally distributed in your circulatory system. Then after a minute, you see how much of your plasma is now free of that substance, and this is known as the clearance of that substance per minute. And how can you calculate it? It is a very simple formula. Suppose you want to study the clearance of substance, you must multiply the concentration of that substance present in your urine multiplied by your volume of the urine divided by the concentration of that substance in plasma. So let me repeat. Suppose if you want to study the clearance of a substance known as inulin, I have already mentioned inulin is a synthetic substance which is injected from outside to study the glomerular filtration rate of your body, and it is neither reabsorbed nor secreted, and जितना ये filter होगा उतना ही ये excrete हो जाएगा. So if you want to study the clearance of inulin, you must first calculate its concentration in your urine. Then you must multiply this concentration with the total amount of urine and divide the concentration divide this value with the value of concentration of inulin in your plasma, and you are going to get the clearance of inulin, and this clearance is going to help you in determining your glomerular filtration rate. So many substances can be used, the clearance of many substances can be used to study different parameters of the kidney. You can study the blood flow through the kidney, you can study the glomerular filtration, you can study tubular absorptions and tubular secretions of different substances with the help of the clearance method. Now let us first discuss the inulin clearance method. Since inulin is freely filtered, it is neither secreted nor reabsorbed, so its rate of excretion in urine is going to be equal to its filtration rate. So inulin gives us information about GFR. So GFR can be calculated by multiplying the concentration of inulin in urine and multiplying it by total amount of urine or volume of urine and dividing it by the concentration of inulin in your plasma. So this whole formula is going to give you the value of GFR, which is very very important. Now for every kidney disease, GFR is a very important parameter and it is calculated for every renal disease, and mostly inulin is used to calculate the GFR. And as I mentioned, inulin is synthetic and is injected from outside, but some people might get a reaction to inulin क्योंकि after all it is synthetic and it may cause allergic reaction in some people. Also it is injected from outside and it is an intervention. You have to inject a substance from outside, so some people are reluctant in taking the injections of inulin. In such people there is another substance which is formed within the body and it is freely filtered. It is not reabsorbed, but a very 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 small negligible amount of it is secreted into the nephron. So this substance can also be used to calculate GFR in candidates who are not fit for inulin, and this substance is creatinine. This is very important, you must remember this. So another replacement for inulin is creatinine. The only what is the advantage of using creatinine instead of inulin? First, it is not going to cause any allergic reactions. It is not injected from outside, it is already produced in the body. But there are some disadvantages of using creatinine. One disadvantage, it is a very small disadvantage, that since creatinine is freely filtered, it is not reabsorbed, but a very 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 minute quantity of it is secreted from the peritubular capillaries into the lumen of the nephron. So the amount which is going to appear in urine, it is going to be slightly greater than the amount which was filtered. So these adjustments can be made in the final calculation to get an approximate reading of GFR. So creatinine clearance is important to assess GFR in people who are not good candidates for inulin, and it is done in the same fashion as in case of inulin. To study GFR with the help of creatinine clearance, you have to multiply the concentration of creatinine in urine with the total amount of urine and divide it with the plasma concentration of creatinine, and you are going to get an almost approximate reading of GFR. So this is very important by MCQ point of view, and there MCQs में पूछा जा सकता है कि which of the following clearance is used to calculate GFR, and if you are given options of inulin and creatinine both, so first go for inulin because inulin gives you exact readings of GFR, or if the option of inulin is not given, you must go for creatinine. And remember, both inulin and creatinine are helpful in giving you the values of GFR in any person, but inulin is more accurate while creatinine is safer, and there is no need to inject creatinine from outside as it is already present in your body. So moving on to the last slide of this lecture, now we are going to discuss how the clearance of a special substance known as PAH, para-aminohippuric acid, is helpful in estimating the renal plasma flow. What is meant by renal plasma flow? As you already know that around 20% of your cardiac output comes to your kidney in per minute. So 20% of your cardiac output is around 1 liter. As you know, your cardiac output is 5 liters. Out of this 5 liters, 1 liter comes to your kidney per minute. and we already know that 40%, 40 to 45% of blood comprises of cells, while 60% comprises of plasma. So your renal blood flow per minute is 1 liter. Out of this 1 liter, around 600 comprises of plasma. So your renal plasma flow is around 600 mL per minute. Now if you need to calculate renal plasma flow of a person, the substance which is used is PAH. PAH is very unique and very important in that it is freely filtered and it is not reabsorbed from the nephron back into the peritubular capillaries. In fact, it is secreted from the peritubular capillaries into the nephron. So here we have the glomerular capillaries and we have the Bowman's capsule and the nephron, and your efferent arteriole then forms your peritubular capillaries. So PAH, para-aminohipparic acid, is freely filtered from the glomerulus into the nephron. It is not reabsorbed, but it is filtered from the peritubular capillaries into the nephron, and the amount which is going to be appearing in your urine will be equal to its filtration plus its secretion. So it is going to tell you about all the blood which is flowing towards your nephron in the form in the glomerular capillaries as well as in the peritubular capillaries. So para-aminohipparic acid, which is PAH, helps you in calculation of your renal plasma flow because it is freely filtered, not reabsorbed, and also secreted from the peritubular capillaries into the nephron. So this is also an important MCQ nugget. You might be asked which of the following substances is used to study renal plasma flow, and the answer for that is going to be PAH, P for plasma and P for para-aminohipparic acid. You must remember this. It is an important MCQ point. I hope you understood today's lecture. It was long and a bit attention consuming, but it was very, very important. And the questions that you can be asked from this part of the lecture are that give the reabsorption of sodium from different parts of the nephron, also give the reabsorption of water from different parts of nephron, and you can be asked about the calculation of GFR with the help of inulin or creatinine, or about the renal plasma flow calculation through clearance of pH. I hope you understood this lecture. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment box.